Okay, so on the exam here, I recommend that you know the directions. Those are already something that you should know before the exam. I would suggest that you hide the timer because the timer will distract you because it's constantly in motion. You don't want to be looking at the timer. I do not recommend, listen to me, I do not recommend that you use the highlighter. So the highlight and clear highlight, I don't recommend that. It takes a long time to do the highlights. Under More, you can pause the test or end the test, and I'll pause it for now. Now, the other controls you should know about is this right here is the actual striking off answers, this ABC here. So you can strike off certain answers, okay, like that. And then you can unstrike them off. And then this right here, you click that to mark for review. It shows you which question number is on the bottom here, as well as how many questions are on that overall module. And this is how you go back and next. Okay, so let's start with question 1. Which choice completes the text with the most logical and precise word or phrase? So on the reading and writing section, if you recall from my coaching, I do not recommend that you start at the beginning of the reading and writing section. I recommend you start about halfway through with English grammar because those will be questions that are mostly just straight multiple choice and you won't have to do nearly as much reading. Okay, so I advanced to question 15 here, about halfway through the 27 questions, and this is the first one which says conventions of standard English. So that's English grammar. So I recommend we start here. Which choice completes the text so it conforms to the conventions of standard English? It says the Australian government now expects to add koalas to the endangered species list due to the destruction of the animal's habitat exacerbated by the dual threats of urbanization and agriculture. Fearing for the Australian blank groups have formed to partner with existing wildlife protection organizations run by the Australian government. Despite these redoubled efforts, the fate of Australia's unofficial mascot remains uncertain. So it's something about icon and conservation, either no punctuation or a comma or a semicolon or a colon. So it says fearing for the Australian icon, and then what happens? Fearing for the Australian icon. Okay, so icon is something that is represented or looked to as sort of a symbol or an icon. And it says, fearing for the Australian icon. Now, do you hear how I read that? There should be a pause. So, given that there's a pause, we should use the comma. If there were no pause, that would be choice B, but I think that's going to be incorrect. If it was a complete sentence, in other words, fearing for the Australian icon, in other words, if they could stand on its own, then you would use the semicolon. Now, if it introduced a list, you'd use the colon. So I'm going to suggest these two choices are incorrect and choice A. Let us move on. Okay, so here's question 16. It says, which choice completes the text so it conforms to the conventions of standard English? Remember, when you get to the English grammar section, which is conventions of standard English, you shouldn't have to read those instructions each time. It's going to be basically the same instructions. So it's they or this, was or were. You see that? So that's kind of how I read the answer choices. I recommend you always scan the answer choices before going to the reading. Following text is from The Black Cat, Works of Edgar Allan Poe, Volume 2 by Edgar Allan Poe. Now, it turns out the author, to some extent, is not that important unless the author is somewhat famous, might give you somewhat of an idea. But on the SAT, you're supposed to take things literally. You're not supposed to worry about background information about the author. So Pluto, and then we have the long end dash, blank, the cat's name, end dash, was my favorite pet and playmate. I alone fed him, and he attended to me wherever I went about the house. It was even with difficulty that I could prevent him from following me through the streets. So Pluto, is it they or this? Okay, so they would be plural, this would be singular. So it's going to be this. So we're going to eliminate the first two choices. So it's either this was or were. So this was the cat's name or this were the cat's name. So because it's a singular cat, this was the cat's name. So we're going to move on. Number 17, again, another conventions of standard English grammar question. And we're going with entirely, and then we're looking at the phrase in any case. So we're looking at changes in punctuation. Over evolutionary time, some sea snails have evolved into what are commonly known as sea slugs. These marine gastropods have either had their shells reduced or have lost them blank. Evolution has allowed them to no longer need their shells for protection. Instead, they're covered in thick, noxious slime or use stinging cells to deter prey. Now, even though I've read a lot of the full sentences in these last few, hopefully you know if you get the idea of what the sentence is about and focus mostly on where the blank is, you don't have to read necessarily the full sentence. So let's reread the part that's really relevant. These marine gastropods have either had their shells reduced or have lost them entirely. And then do we go comma, in any case, evolution? Now that's a really run-on sentence, but we do have a semicolon here, so that seems to end the idea. Have lost them entirely, and then do we do in any case? So is any case separated by an en dash? In other words, is that defining what the previous part of the sentence is about? I don't think so. If we say entirely in any case, there's no pause there, so that's not following the standards of conventional English, because in any case is separate from the word entirely, because in any case is linked to evolution. We need to have some punctuation there. So it's either entirely in any case with a comma or a period. So I'm going to suggest we go with the period, because we could say in any case, comma, evolution has allowed them to no longer need their shells for protection. And then that's a complete idea ending at this semicolon. All right, let us move on. Question 18, another question, conventions of standard English. We're talking about help or helps, something about myself or would have helped myself. Again, English grammar. It had been 5 months and 27 days since I had a hot, home-cooked meal. After hugging my mother and my brother, I put off the much-needed shower in favor of roasted turkey, mashed potatoes, and my mother's homemade gravy. While I recounted my adventures from the wilds of Alaska, comma, I blank to 2 more plates full of my family's cooking, filling up on good food and the love of family. So did I helps or help, or did I helped myself? Sounds like I helped myself, because we're referring to the past tense. The author is describing something that happened in the past. But it's also not a conditional, because conditional would have helped myself. So helped myself is past tense. So we're going to go with choice D. Now helps is ongoing. That's not correct. Help myself, that's present tense. So these, I believe, are incorrect. And again, it's not conditional. Okay, we'll move on. Question 19, which choice completes the text so it conforms to the conventions of standard English? So something to do with tree and then the letter A. And this is adapted from somebody I don't recognize, a 17th century fairy tale. Upon finally repelling a months-long siege, the townspeople departed the walled city and began tending to their long-neglected crops. Not long after that, a man was riding through the forest when he came upon a little blank. And then it says, fruit tree that, according to legend, only blossomed once every 70 years and produced only a single foul-smelling fig. Okay, he came upon a little tree, okay, and it says, a fruit tree that, according to legend, now think about this, that, comma, according to legend, now the according to legend describes the fruit tree. In other words, it's totally set off from the rest of the sentence. It's according to legend. So, comma here, the grammar is correct. But then let's consider what's going on here. So we're kind of in the middle of a sentence. says a man was riding through the forest when he came upon an odd little tree, and it says a fruit tree that, okay, so let's consider what that's going to be. I don't think we're going to end out a period, because a fruit tree that is really connected to what's going on with tree. We can see that's because we keep describing the tree with according to legend. So we're not going to go with a period. Furthermore, we could say a comma because that's parallel structure. An odd little tree, comma, a fruit tree that, comma, according to legend. So this is definitely possible. An odd little fruit tree. And then we would end the idea at that moment with a semicolon. And then it would say a fruit tree that, comma, according to legend. So that's possible. D is not going to be correct because there's definitely a punctuation there. So a little update here. When I was first selecting the answer choice, I was going with tree semicolon A because I thought that we'd kind of go into a separate clause, the sentence would be run on. But we do need to have parallel structure. So an odd little tree, comma, a fruit tree that, comma, according to legend, comma. So an odd little fruit tree, an odd little tree, comma, a fruit tree that, comma. So a fruit tree that and according to legend, and those are both in parallel structure, both being set apart by commas. So I hope that makes sense before we move on. Okay, question 20, again, standard English, English grammar. So it's they, this, it, or one. At just half the density of liquid water, lithium is the lightest and least dense of the pure element metals. That means blank would float when placed on water. Now, I don't think we need to read the rest of this. That means they, this, it, or one. So what is this blank referring to? It's referring to lithium. So they is possessive. This is a direct object. So that's not quite it because we don't have lithium in the sentence at hand. So if referring to the previous sentence, we're going to say it, not one, because that'd be like a one singular lithium piece or something. But I think it's it. All right, let's move on. Again, standard English grammar. Which choice completes the text so it conforms to the conventions of standard English? We're talking about Versailles and with or which and maybe that. This comes from A Lesser Louis, which is about Louis XIV. Upon learning of the magician's arrival, my father, king at the time, summoned the showman to perform. That night the magician mystified attendees with the illusion we now know as vault of blank. He secured a position as the resident performer at the Royal Opera Hall. Okay, now known as Vault of Versailles, and then we're going to do comma, or semicolon, or en dash. We now know as Vault of Versailles, and then we're going to say we definitely at least need to pause. And which he secured, that's very awkward. And which he secured, that's not the conventions of standard English. Is it with that? So with that is not standard English because we're not sure what that is referring to. So we're going to say with which. Now notice it's either comma with which he secured or end of the clause with a semicolon. And then we say with which he secured. So with which though is directly describing the clause that we're actually in, like the sentence that we're in. So I'm going to go with Versailles, comma, with which. Okay, so choice B. All right, and then let's move on. Okay, now question 22. Now we're moving on to something else. Which choice completes the text with the most logical transition? So this is still related to English grammar, but the most logical transition is going to be in a positive here in this blank that makes the sentence go properly. The 1956 mayoral race in Grand Vista was fraught with corruption. Each of the three candidates faced charges of dishonest electioneering practices and voter tampering. The town was so incensed by the behavior that the election was canceled and the position of mayor was vacated for a full year. Blank The town opted to forego formal leadership instead of selecting from their available choices. So to me, that blank sounds like a contrast to having a leader, that is, having an elected official. So in contrast, are we going to demonstrate? No, I don't think so. Because we opted to forego. Forego means to forsake or to temporarily get rid of formal leadership. So do we say however? Or do we say in other words or notwithstanding? So it says the position of mayor was vacated for a full year. The idea is that we need to further that idea. So I'm going to go with in other words, because in other words, if we forgo formal leadership, then the position of mayor was vacated for a full year. That's really saying the same thing, just in other words. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, again, another logical transition question for question 23. Most logical transition. At 214 feet below sea level, Furnace Creek boasts the lowest altitude of any golf course in the world. Its 18 holes are a sight to behold, surrounded by idyllic mountain vistas, peppered with beautiful tamarisk, I don't know, and palm trees. Blank, the course is nearly unplayable in the summer months due to temperatures that can exceed 130 degrees Fahrenheit. Are we going to say nevertheless, consequently, likewise, or specifically? Likewise would be going what the previous sentence is talking about. Consequently would be having to do with what we were talking about that creates the warm summer months. Do we say nevertheless? Yes, we do say nevertheless, because we say nevertheless, even though people want to play on this golf course, it's surrounded by beautiful things and it's something to behold, the course is nearly unplayable. So unplayable is contrasted to a sight to behold. So we say nevertheless, because we introduce that contrast because of the high temperatures, people can't play the course in the summer. Okay, so let's move on. Question 24, again, another logical transition. Today, Regina would demand the immediate implementation of the changes she had requested last quarter. Unless her account manager would guarantee the delivery date, she would take her business elsewhere. As a high-value client for over a decade, Regina had come to expect exceptional service. Blank, for the past 2 months, so it's either in effect, ultimately, besides, or however. So blank for the past 2 months, she had watched as seasoned professionals around the CEO had resigned or been fired. She felt certain this chaos would affect her business if she didn't use an ultimatum. So Regina is expecting exceptional service. She's watched seasoned professionals, and she has felt that she really has to have the good service. Otherwise, she's going to issue an ultimatum. Otherwise, she expects chaos. So we have to sort of go along with previously what she had been observing. Is it ultimately? Well, let's see. Ultimately kind of means finally. So would we say finally for the past 2 months? She had watched maybe. Besides, okay, so that's sort of like a long side. Or do we say however as a contrast? So when I was about to select the answer on this one, I actually ended up getting it wrong after reviewing the exam. It turns out we should select the transition word of however. Why however? So let's think. Today, Regina would demand the immediate implementation of the changes she had requested last quarter. Unless her account manager would guarantee the delivery date, she would take her business elsewhere. As a high-value client for over a decade, Regina had come to expect exceptional service. So in other words, she's very much demanding the exceptional service, and she was requesting certain things, and she would only act if the account manager would acquiesce to her demands. There's a transition word, and notice things have been different the last 2 months. For the past 2 months, she had watched as seasoned professionals around the CEO had been resigned or fired, and she felt certain that chaos would affect her business if she didn't issue an ultimatum. So those are bad things going on. She's expecting good service, so there's a contrast. So we're going to go with however. So however for the correct answer. So hope that makes sense. We'll move on. Again, logical transition, question 25. Either reluctantly, obviously, subsequently, or in summary. On Friday, October 13th, 1307, King Philip IV of France commanded agents of the crown to attack members of the Knights Templar at dawn. Many knights were captured and arrested. The captive knights were tortured until they gave false confessions, and were they reluctantly, obviously, subsequently, or in summary, burned at the stake. Until they gave false confessions. So false confessions means that's not truthful. So are they going to reluctantly be burned at the stake? Or subsequently be burned at the stake? So subsequently implies in time. In summary is not what burning at the stake happens. It's not a summary because we're not summarizing the false confession. Obviously is more like an opinion. So we're going to go with subsequently, because subsequently is going to happen in time, because we're describing things in time, because we're describing dawn, captured, then arrested, tortured until. So until suggests time. So this is a time word, subsequently. All right, let's move on. Okay, now we go to question 26. This is a different instruction. It says the student wants to present the discovery of the professional chariot from Civita Guiana excavation. Which choice most effectively uses relevant information from the notes to accomplish this goal? Okay, so let's read what's going on here. And we're going to have to kind of read the choices. So I wouldn't recommend reading the choices yet because there's a lot of information. While researching a topic, a student has taken the following notes. The ruins were not discovered until 1750. They had been covered in ash since 79 AD. 2021, archaeologists discovered the ancient Roman professional chariot from a villa at Civita Guiana, located just outside the walls of ancient Pompeii. Ceremonial carriage is the first of its kind to be discovered in this area, and it's also a unique find because other vehicles found have been for functional everyday use. Okay, so we want to effectively use relevant information from the notes to accomplish the goal to present the discovery. So we're going to say, covered in volcanic ash since 79 AD, the ruins were not discovered until 1750. In 2021, archaeologists made historically significant find just outside. Maybe. We don't include a lot of the specific details about the carriage, though. In 2021, archaeologists discovered the ancient Roman processional chariot there, located just outside the walls of Pompeii, covered in volcanic ash since that time. The ruins were not discovered until... This is a lot of the same information as A, but kind of in a reverse order. C, archaeologists' finds like the chariots and other ceremonial objects help expand our understanding of the life of the ancient world. Covered in volcanic ash since 79 AD, the ruins of Civita Guiana were not discovered until 1750. Okay, so this states more of the importance of why finding this chariot is important. And then D, in 2021, the ancient Roman processional chariot was unearthed during an archaeological dig at a villa outside the walls of ancient Pompeii. The ceremonial carriage is unique because not only is the first of its kind ever be discovered in this area, but it's the first vehicle to be discovered that was not used for functional everyday use. Okay, I think we're going with D because that's really using the relevant information to say how this chariot is unique. And that's the most unique of these choices. Again, A and B are so similar to one another. Let's move on. Okay, question 27 is a lot like question 26, where we want to accomplish a goal of using relevant information from the notes. And we want to emphasize the historical impact of Maya Angelou as a poet and cultural voice. She's the Black woman's poet laureate, famed autobiographer, and highly acclaimed of I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings and The Heart of a Woman. Her autobiographies were written using techniques reserved for fiction writing, more often reserved for fiction writings, dialogue, characterization, setting, and plot. Her poems are referred to anthems for African Americans. She began writing poetry at a young age. She recited on Pulse in the Morning at President Bill Clinton's inauguration, 1993, making her the first African American and the first woman to recite a poem at a presidential inauguration, the recording of which earned her a Grammy Award. And finally, her poetry explores themes of music, love, loss, racism, discrimination, and struggle. Okay, so which of the following accomplishes this goal? Now, one strategy we sometimes have on the SAT is to read from the bottom up, not from the top down, because somewhat more often the correct answer is hidden towards the bottom. So I'll read D first. At a young age, Maya Angelou began writing poetry. Several volumes of her poetry have been published. Most notably, her poem On Pulse of the Morning was recited at Bill Clinton's inauguration in 1993. So that's the shortest of these for the most part in terms of words. But it also doesn't really emphasize her historical impact. So I'm going to go with no in D. She's known as the Black Woman's Poet Laureate. She composed poems that were often thought of as anthems for African Americans. On Pulse of the Morning, at the 1993 presidential inauguration, made history as the first woman to recite a poem in a U.S. presidential inauguration, earning her a Grammy Award. Okay, so that's pretty significant because a presidential inauguration is significant for United States politics and so on. B, named the Black Woman's Poet Laureate, famed autobiographer behind these titles. That's not enough information in terms of her cultural significance and her voice. Okay, A, she was famed poet and autobiographer whose writing explored the themes of music, love, loss, racism, discrimination, and struggle. Her writing style was unique, and she wrote using fiction writing techniques such as dialogue, characterization, setting, and plot. Okay, so this is a nice description and gives us more insight into her, but I would say this doesn't show the cultural significance. C shows the cultural significance with phrases like made history. So we're going to go with C. We're now going to back up to the beginning of this module because we started in the middle, if you recall. Hey, we're halfway through this module 1 of the reading and writing. Could you do me a little favor? Could you subscribe to our YouTube channel? Yes, click the button down below which has you subscribe. Please follow us for more content on this channel. We release videos as regular as possible. We're working with some partners going to be releasing lots of free content as a way of saying thank you to our audience. So could you go ahead and give this video a like, share it out amongst your social media networks? We'd appreciate that very much. Let's get back to today's content. Okay, which choice completes the text with the most logical and precise word or phrase? So the most logical and precise word or phrase is going to come from filling in the blank and looking at English standards. So again, this is not grammar. This is the word that fits the definition, what's going on most closely. Standard, distinguishing, diminishing, typical. So this is like vocabulary. And the idea is that we have to know what these words mean and then predict what kind of words should go in there before going with these. Is it either standard, distinguishing, diminishing, or typical? The golden-crowned kinglet is a small songbird found throughout North America. It has few commonalities with similar songbirds. However, the golden-crowned kinglet's blank characteristics, such as its yellow crown, white-winged bars, black stripes over the eyes, set it apart from other birds. In addition, its high-pitched one-note call and fearlessness around humans make it a favorite amongst bird watchers. Now, the word however is significant here, because we're making a contrast. So then we're trying to look at its what kind of characteristics. So it's got commonalities among similar songbirds, but it seems to be unique because we've got the word however. So maybe the word unique or one of a kind, or hey, how about this? Distinguishing. You see how I predicted that? Distinguishing means it's not typical. Okay, so we're going to go with diminishing and move on. Okay, most logical, precise word or phrase. This is, once again, like vocabulary, but let's predict what goes in this blank. Culmination, origination, deregulation, or epicenter. In 1877, the Koshikawa Botanical Garden became the blank of botanical research and studies in Japan. Prior to its establishment, the study of plants and herbs in Japan had been relegated to smaller, shogunate-controlled gardens. By consolidating these smaller, less academic efforts into a singular institution, botanical science in Japan continues to thrive to this day. So here's the idea. There used to be very many small gardens in Japan, but then we opened this huge garden, and then the studies of botany in Japan grew significantly. So we're saying it became sort of the main place. So that to me sounds like epicenter. Not the origination, not necessarily where it started, not necessarily culmination, not necessarily where it ended, and not necessarily deregulation in terms of laws. Epicenter. That's where things are concentrated. Okay, so I think that's good. Let's move on. So now for question 3, we have a different set of instructions. Which choice best describes the function of the underlined portion of in the overall structure of the text? So we're going to pay attention to this underlined structure of the text, and it's either going to present, explain, provide, or support something. It's from Castle Marvel, and I don't recognize this title, so let's go ahead and just get into it. It says, I wish books had never been invented, or schools either, for that matter. I've been digging away at one of Aesop's fables for the last 2 hours, and I can't make any sense of it out of it at all. It's a lot of stuff about some doves and some hawks that got to fighting, and whether the doves are the hawks or not, how's this fellow going to find out? The person thinks that books and schools should not have been invented. He or she doesn't like Aesop's fables because they can't make sense of it. They're very frustrated. They're thinking it's taking too much time to learn one of Aesop's fables. So what's the role? Does it present the speaker as lazy and unmotivated? Not necessarily. The speaker is trying hard. It explains why the speaker's having trouble reading Aesop's fables? Probably. It provides an example of the speaker's frustration with books? Possibly, probably. D, it supports the speaker's lack of interest in academia. Yeah, not so much. The speaker is interested in academia because they're trying to learn something. Let's go back, digging away at one of Aesop's fables for the last 2 hours, and it can't make any sense of it all. Now, are we specifically focused on Aesop's fables or just one of Aesop's fables? So just one of Aesop's fables, so it's an example. It's an illustration of the speaker's frustration with books overall. Because remember, the overall subject of this quote is school and books themselves. Okay, so I think let's move on. Once again, question 4, very similar to question 3. We're going to look at what's the underlined portion, which describes the structure of the text, what's its role and all that. Okay, it's either going to support, explain, reinforce, or cite something. The agriculture industry's push towards environmentally friendly pest control has seen breakthroughs and setbacks, particularly among farmers with orchards and field crops. For example, the technique known as trap cropping, which involves growing plants that naturally attract pests away from the production crops, has produced uneven results. While the practice has been successful for smaller farms, it has proven too expensive for larger farms to implement. So we're doing these environmentally good things, and it's successful on the small scale, but not on the large scale because it's too expensive. So what's the role of the underlined text? Does it support the main idea of environmentally friendly pest control, producing both successes and failures? Somewhat, because it has had some uneven results. So let's keep A for now. It explains why environmentally pest control techniques are not viable for large-scale farms. And that's partly true. What's going on? It reinforces the earlier claim that cost increases impede the transition to environmentally friendly pest control methods. So I don't think there's any mention of the expense in the first couple sentences. Do you know that? So we can safely get rid of C. D, it cites trap cropping as an example of why smaller farms are more efficient than larger farms. So there's no mention in the underline about the trap cropping. So it's either going to be A or B. Now, by the way, if you were unsure on the actual exam, especially if you're low on time, you do want to make a quick decision here and choose one that's your educated guess. So I don't think it's B, because this underlined portion doesn't really explain why it's too expensive for most larger farms to implement. It's just the cost thing. So it supports the main idea that there are both successes and failures. So let's go with A and then we'll move on. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at two different texts, text 1 and text 2. And based on these texts, how would the author of text 2 most likely respond to the opinion of text 1? So we're going to compare text 1 and 2. Are they going to agree, claim something, endorse something, or argue something? Okay, let's get into this. It says for text 1, the beginning of radio is often regarded as the archetype of modern-day social media. Starting with a consortium of innovators who sought to share news, information, and stories, the radio brought people together through listening and shared experiences and connected people across vast distances. Those who remember the time when radio was the source of human connectivity remember those shared experiences, many of which were often shared between family and friends, listening to a human voice, share breaking news, or vivid telling of stories. Okay, so that's text 1. Text 2, social media, at its core, is based on user-centric communal activity that both facilitates and enhances human connectivity. Social platforms enable users to share news, information, and stories across the globe and allow individuals and communities to connect, generate content, respond, and participate. Critics would say social media has sabotaged true human connectivity, but I believe that without social media, our planet would have remained closed off, halting human connectivity at our borders. So how would the text 2 author likely respond to the opinion of text 1? So remember, text 1 is all about radio beginning the idea of social media, and the connectivity was shared with a lot of people listening to the radio at the same time. Whereas text 2, it's still about connecting, but there are more ways to do it. It can be shared across the globe, and people can generate their own content, respond, participate, etc. Okay, so how would the text 2 author respond to the opinion of text 1? Would they agree that the radio was the ideal social platform to connect people across long distances? I don't think so. Text 2 really emphasizes the good parts of social media. B, would they would claim that the radio and modern social media were equal in stimulating social connectivity and shared human experiences? Maybe. Let's see if we can rule it out later, or we'll come back to it. They would endorse a scale back in modern social media in hopes that society can one day recapture the magic of in-person social connectivity. So there's no mention of social media negativity. They do mention that there are critics, but the text 2 author does not have a negative view of social media. And then how about D? It says, they would argue that social media's reach has expanded far beyond that of radio, but has maintained some of the same communal functions. Okay, I think we should go with choice D, because choice D is really extending the idea of community to greater reach with social media compared to radio. Okay, so let's call that our answer, and then we'll move on. Okay, so now we have a different set of instructions, question 6. According to the text, what is true about Dorian Gray? So Dorian Gray must be a character. And then we're going to say something about him. Now, Oscar Wilde's novel, A Picture of Dorian Gray, which is somewhat famous. Oscar Wilde is a famous English author, I believe. It turns out that he has a passage here. So let's go ahead and read that. I turned halfway around and saw Dorian Gray for the first time. When our eyes met, I felt that I was growing pale. A curious sensation of terror came over me. I knew that I had come face to face with someone whose mere personality was so fascinating that, if I allowed it to do so, it would absorb my whole nature, my whole soul, my very art itself. I have always been my own master, at least until I met Dorian Gray. Then, but I don't know how to explain it to you, something seemed to tell me that I was on the verge of a terrible crisis in my life. I had a strange feeling that the fate in store for me, exquisite joys and exquisite sorrows. This thing about Dorian Gray, terror comes on when Dorian Gray is seen, fascinating personality, absorbing whole nature. The person is no longer their master. They can't explain it. They felt like they were on the verge of a terrible crisis. So let's use those phrases I just reiterated and choose what is meant about Dorian Gray. His physically imposing demeanor causes the narrator to fear for their safety. Okay, so maybe his presence evokes a deep sense of unease in the narrator. Yeah, maybe. His grotesque appearance leaves the narrator feeling a sense of revulsion. Not necessarily revulsion, because it turns out. And also, is there a mention of his grotesque appearance? I don't think so. It's more so Dorian Gray's personality, so we can safely eliminate C. His preoccupation with details of the narrator's life feels insecure. Feels insincere. So that's not right. That's just not even relevant. So is it the physically imposing demeanor or his presence? Personality, sensation, nature, seem to tell me. That would be presence, not physical parts, physically imposing demeanor, his presence. Okay, so we're going to go with choice B and move on. Okay, now question 7, pretty similar to question 6, and we're going to answer a question about Eeyore's birthday, and based on the text, what's true about it. So, is it festive? Does he enjoy it? Seems to have been forgotten? Or was Eeyore, did Pooh surprise Eeyore? The text is from In Which Eeyore Had a Birthday and Gets 2 Presents, Winnie the Pooh. So Winnie the Pooh is a pretty well-known children's book. Many of you are probably familiar with it. You seem so sad, Eeyore. Actually, let me try Pooh voice. You seem so sad, Eeyore. Sad? Why should I be sad? It's my birthday, the happiest day of the year. Your birthday? Said Pooh in great surprise. Of course it is. Can't you see? Look at all the presents I have had. He waved his foot from side to side, looking at the birthday cake. Look at the birthday cake, candles and pink sugar. Pooh looked, first to the right and then to the left. Presents, said Pooh. Birthday cake, said Pooh. Where? Can't you see them? No, said Pooh. Neither can I, said Eeyore. Joke, he explained. Ha ha. So, what is true about Eeyore's birthday? So we know there's a lot of presents. We know he's describing presents and a birthday cake, and he gives some details. And Pooh says that he seems sad. So is Eeyore's birthday a festive occasion? Well, somewhat. There's things there. Eeyore enjoys celebrating his birthday. So maybe not. Probably not. Eeyore's birthday seems to have been forgotten. Pooh has surprised Eeyore on his birthday. So did Pooh surprise Eeyore? Or is it just that Pooh was surprised that it was Eeyore's birthday? So Pooh was surprised. Pooh was not the one to surprise Eeyore. So is it a festive occasion? Or does Eeyore enjoy celebrating his birthday? Well, we can't be sure that he enjoys celebrating his birthday because Pooh thinks he looks sad. Plus, he's Eeyore. If you know anything about Eeyore, he has a voice like this, and he's not excited. So I too quickly eliminated the choice of Eeyore's birthday seems to have been forgotten. One of the things you actually notice from this passage is it seems like Pooh has forgotten Eeyore's birthday. So that's been overlooked. Indeed, Pooh was surprised. He wasn't the one that did surprise Eeyore. Eeyore shows no desire to really celebrate his birthday. And it turns out that even though there's things at the party, it's not necessarily a festive occasion. People aren't happy and exuberant. There's not a lot of people there. And so Eeyore's birthday seems to have been forgotten by Pooh, especially by other people as well. That does seem to be the case. So that is the correct answer. And we'll move on. Okay, now question 8. What is the main idea of the text? And it's either going to showcase, express, encourage, or demonstrate something. Okay, worldwide Lego enthusiasts have joined forces in taking it upon themselves to fix, seal, and heal exteriors of buildings, public and private, by filling in facade cracks, crevices, and holes of structures with tiny building blocks, known as dispatch work. It was started as a movement by street artist Jan Vorman and has become a global inspiration for fellow artists and participants, all sharing in their love of Legos, repairs, and street art to bring smiles and joy around the globe. Okay, so what's the main idea? Basically, we're saying that certain buildings are missing little pieces, and starting with Jan, they're these Lego enthusiasts that carry Legos around, probably in their pockets, and they put their little Legos in there, and it's somewhat artistic, but also helps fill in cracks and crevices and holes in buildings. Is the main idea to showcase an artistic movement launched by artists using their skills and creativity to enhance the appearance of structures? Maybe. To express concern that dispatch works Lego repairs may not be structurally sound? I don't think so. There's no mention that Lego is not doing a good job. C. To encourage people to look for other creative uses for Lego products. I mean, maybe, but that's not necessarily the main idea of the text. We're not focusing on the uses of Lego. We're focused on what's actually happening with the Legos in the buildings. to demonstrate that Lego blocks are superior to traditional materials such as brick and mortar. Not necessarily. We can't be sure that it makes the building stronger, so it is an artistic movement to enhance the appearance of structures. Okay, so we're going to move on. Okay, now question 9. It says, which finding of McLettigan's research, if true, would most directly support his claim? So we've got a lot of things to read here, so let's just go ahead and read the passage. Since the American government had never paid up on its promises in the 1855 treaty, many Nimpuyu, that's Nez Perez bands, were disgruntled and reluctant to hear more empty promises. After a few days of deliberation without agreement, Thunder Eyes declared the Nez Perez nation dissolved. They would be separate people, the treaty group and the non-treaty group. When pro-treaty leaders signed the 1863 treaty on June 9, 1863, the U.S. government assumed they had reached an agreement with all Nez Perez regarding the relinquishment of their ancestral lands. Chief Joseph, Chief Whitebird, and other non-treaty headmen, meanwhile, thought they would not be held to any agreement that they did not actually agree to. Historian Lester McLettigan argues that this 1863 treaty planted seeds of conflict that would eventually grow into the 1877 Nez-Perce War, which, if true, would most directly support the claim. So is it the non-treaty Nez Perez eventually relented from their hardline stance and moved to U.S. government reservations? Okay, so we're going to have a timer here just because we're low on time, and I'm going to go through these last couple somewhat quickly. So remember, we have these two groups. We have the treaty group and the non-treaty group. So which would most directly support his claim? That's McLettigan's research. That'd be C. As the Nez Perez grew increasingly frustrated with encroachments by American miners and homesteaders throughout the late 1800s, violent attacks on American settlers became more common. And so that would be seeds of conflict to lead to this Nez-Perce War. Okay, so here we have brand A, brand B, brand C. Which choice most effectively uses data from the table to illustrate the claim? So we have additives of sugar, yellow dye, or non-nutritious filler compounds. A recent study measured the amounts of additives in 3 leading multivitamin brands. While nearly everyone recognizes the benefits of taking over-the-counter multivitamins, some nutritionists, including Dr. Sarah Frog, have voiced concerns regarding ingredients many consumers would be shocked to find hiding in their multivitamins. Common additives include filler compounds, artificial colors, and even sugar, none of which provide any nutritional or therapeutic value. As a result, Dr. Frog urges consumers to remain skeptical when leading brands claim to have higher purity standards. For example, which choice most directly illustrates this claim? Well, that would be brand A contains more sugar, yellow dye number 5, and filler compounds than the other 2 leading brands combined. Look at this. You add these two, you get a lot of sugar. Look at all that yellow dye and look at all these non-nutritious compounds. Okay, so that's why choice A is correct. Which claim most accurately represents the data from this poll? So we have 1,000 job fair attendees. They were polled to find out what they were looking for in a job search. Each attendee chose a single most important quality among the 5 characteristics. Notice the percent that considered these various 5 characteristics are important. Notice job security is the clear leader, but it's slightly less than 50%. So you might think B, job security, was the most important trait sought by all the job fair attendees. But the reason this is incorrect is because it's not all people at the job fair think that the job security is the most important thing. But it turns out, given that there are 1,000 people, job security is a little bit less than 50%. If we add independent work, flexible hours, high income, and opportunities for advancement, those are going to add up to more than 50%, which is more than 500 people out of the 1,000 people. So choice C, out of those surveyed, over 500 people cited something other than job security as the most important quality. Okay, so I think we'll move on. Now, we have which choice best describes the data from the table that support the researcher's hypothesis. So we have week 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, average tadpole mass on the vertical axis by group, and then we have different line types shown as far as classical, jazz, disco, or rock music in terms of groups. So we did a field study was conducted to determine the effects of music on the development of amphibians using tadpoles from the Ceratophyridae family. I don't know. A group of tadpoles was randomly divided into 4 groups of 50 tadpoles. Each of the 4 groups has played music from a different genre 12 hours a day for 4 weeks. All 200 tadpoles were weighed once a week. The mean, that is the average, mass of each group in grams was then plotted on the given graph. A researcher hypothesized that jazz music would have a more positive correlation with tadpole growth than other genres of music. So, which of these supports the researcher's hypothesis? Well, look at the jazz music. That's the thick black line. It's clearly the fastest growing overall, and it's on top, and we get the largest mass tadpoles. So tadpoles in the jazz group grew at a faster rate than tadpoles in each of the other groups. Plain and simple, choice A. Question 13. Which choice most effectively uses the data from the table to complete the statement? So we have years from 2002 to 2005. We have these different games. These are video games. And these are speed running world record times per year. So in a 2004 documentary about video game speed running, which is a niche hobby where players race to complete the game as quickly as possible, it was released to critical acclaim. This brought significant attention to speed running, and the world records for popular video games are included in the given table as a result of this increased interest. Look what happens once the year 2004 happens. Look at the times of speed running. It's going down, but also significantly amongst all these games. We don't necessarily know the amount of time, or the number of people participating, We can't necessarily know if choice B is correct. More new world records were set in these 5 games after the film's release than the previous 2 years. Yes, that's true. The amount of time players spent speedrunning declined. We can't be sure about that. And then some speedrunning unchanged year to year? No, so it must be A. Okay, so after the film's release, we go lower and lower in terms of the time for this speedrunning. Okay, which choice most logically completes the text? So let's assume that this text makes sense and that the statement we're going to choose follows from the previous sentences. Marcella once suffered from monthly migraine headaches until she read about a 2012 American Academy of Neurology study in which participants added a daily high-dose riboflavin supplement that's 400 milligrams to their existing treatment regimens. Participants recorded multiple benefits, including less frequent and less severe migraines. Upon reading this study, did she take riboflavin but not have reduced frequency of her migraines? No. Did she experience relief by taking the riboflavin and other things? Not necessarily. We can't be sure about that. And how about choice D? Did she remain on the same treatment plan she had followed? That doesn't follow from the text. So C, it says, she successfully reduced the frequency and severity of her migraines by adding in the 400 milligrams of riboflavin. Okay, just in time. If you are done sooner, so as we learned on the first module, if you are done sooner before the exam is over, what you should do is you should put the mouse down, you should do a little stretching in your seat, and you have a little extra time before the next module begins. Now for me, the next module is going to begin momentarily, and it turns out, again, I'm using double time only because I'm explaining myself and doing all this time reading out loud, which is slower than if I'd be reading in my head if I was actually taking the exam. So you should be prepared to take the exam on your own and do as such on test day. And so I'm going to go straight into Module 2. Hopefully Module 2 is harder questions because I hopefully got most all the questions correct from Module 1. So we'll get into it here.